everyone, welcome to Social with a Side of Justice, the podcast where we talk about real issues that impact our communities.
This season, we're focusing on mental health and why getting help isn't always easy.
We're looking at the challenges people face when trying to get support.
From stigma and cost to policy gaps and unequal access in different communities.
Throughout the season, we'll be talking with local mental health professionals to better understand how care works, what barriers exist, and what can be done to improve access.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Social with a Side of Justice. I'm Angeline.
I'm Maria Luisa.
And I'm Mayana, and we'll be your host for today's episode.
Today we will be joined by Ms. Tristan Fleck, the Director of Educational Services and Integrated Care Concepts.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, to start, can you explain to our listeners what exactly integrated care concepts are and what kind of services does your organization provide?
Sure. So we are a mental health organization that provides psychotherapy and psychiatry services to children as young as 3 and adults as old as 100. We also have an adolescent program, which is called a partial hospitalization and an intensive outpatient, which is a step below residential care for kids who feel like they need that additional support, which is a day program that runs 9 to 3. So they come to us, they get skills, they have individual services with a clinician, they have family therapy services, and then they also have groups every single day.
Nice.
And then could you tell us a little bit about what your role looks like, such as like what are some of the things that you do on a typical day?
Sure. So I have a lot of roles at Integrated, but as far as relating to the educational services, I mostly work with the schools and the guidance counselors to get the students their work, to make sure that when they go back to school, they're not so far behind, because that could be triggering as well. And, you come back to school and it's, where's my work? What happened to it? I did it. So I make sure that that doesn't happen. Aside from that, I work with school-based organizations and I bring clinicians into schools so that students have more access to mental health support.
Before this job, you worked as a teacher here in Long Branch at the Alt School and later as a student facilitator at the high school. How did those experiences shape the way you think about student mental health?
So as a first-year teacher, my principal was also a social worker, which is usually unique because principals usually come from an education background and not a mental health background. So that really shaped how I looked at mental health, because it made me understand that students can't learn if their brain is on fire from everything else that they're dealing with. So it really taught me to work with the entire student and not just focusing on the academic support. When I stepped into the role of student facilitator, that really gave me the opportunity to make that a real life thing and explain to other teachers what I learned working at the alt school so that we could really support kids where they were.
And I also wanted to ask, do you work like directly with our school base or any other services within our schools?
I do. We have a clinician that comes in twice a week. She supports the students who need services in Portuguese or Spanish, and we make sure that we also do trainings for the school-based staff and other guidance counselors around different methodologies that they may not have learned previously.
So when you were working in Long Branch, did you see how, like, firsthand how mental health challenges affected students, and what stood out to you the most?
I did, and it was difficult because those were some of the students who couldn't get access to support, or it wasn't appropriate within their culture or their family setting to talk about mental health. So it was that constant struggle for them. Is this okay to feel this way, and what do I do to get support when my family isn't supportive of me getting those services?
And you mentioned kids experiencing like struggles with telling their families due to like cultural reasons and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about like how you approach those situations and how you like, especially like with the parents and like acceptance within those spaces?
I think it is definitely a struggle, but we try to, again, work with the family together and make them understand that it's not something to be ashamed of. And, if you need support with mental health with some sort of medication or other services, we try to relate it to another another health issue. Like if you have diabetes, you're going to take your medication for that. So it's the same thing when we go to...
Stand for the flag salute. If you're walking in the halls, please stop. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right.
Please be seated. Good morning, Long Branch High School. My
My name is
Allison,
Allison
and here are your
Plumley.
announcements for today. Juniors, there will be a class meeting today during staff in room 427. Last call for yearbook purchases. Go to johnsons.com to purchase now. And juniors, if you're interested in applying for Team PEP next year, there will be an interest meeting on Monday, March 16th after school in room 207. If you have any questions, please ask Mrs. T. Cooper or Ms. Castano for the application process. Again, interest meeting Monday, March 16th in room 207 for next year's Team PEP class. The last day to sign up for Battle of the Classes will be this Friday. See Ms. Rulin in the dance room for any questions. And today's staff schedule is math, history, personal finance, and English. That is all your announcements for today. Have a great Greenway day.
The like
What you do, like how do you approach
like
those
how do you
situations?
okay yeah, like the how do you approach the cultural okay yeah okay.
It's okay. The flow.
So you mentioned that you a lot of the time you see like a lack of acceptance within certain like cultural like just certain cultures and a lot of students who struggle with that. So how do you approach situations like that and how do you work with families that may not be so accepting?
It's definitely difficult to help families break that stigma because it's been ingrained in them for so many years that it's not okay to talk about any type of mental health out in the community or admit that because it can become embarrassing to the family. So we work with clinicians that other people can identify with. So you might be more comfortable speaking to someone who speaks your language or can identify with your culture because you have something in common. So we do really bring the clinicians to meet the families where they're at. And then aside from that, we explain to them that if people need to take medication or seek sort of treatment for mental health, it's just the same as having diabetes or another medical illness that you treat with medication to make your quality of life better.
And have you ever like encountered like maybe a family that was just really like difficult or like kind of like hard to work with because of like their strict views on that?
You do encounter that, and it just takes over time that with the illness not being treated, that families come to a point where they're like, okay, I don't know what else to do, and if this is what my child needs to feel better, it's better than the alternative where, people harm themselves or complete suicide. So it just becomes important to make families see that.
And how many clinicians do you guys have?
Within the company itself, we have 65 clinicians, but in the schools, I have 10.
Do you know how many are like you said, like bilingual or even trilingual if possible?
Yes, I do have two. Well, one is trilingual and one is bilingual clinicians, and then I do have clinicians of different cultures and religious backgrounds, so it really does help people identify with someone that, sees their views from where they come from.
Okay, and what made you want to move from working to schools to moving to working in mental health services?
So I really loved what I did as a student facilitator. It helped me connect to the community, connect to the families, build, rapports with kids beyond their graduation. So that was very rewarding for me, but I felt like in that role that I had met the potential that I could as a professional, and that I needed to step outside the box and do something different so that I could grow.
I just wanted to also like bring up kind of like how you mentioned that like you are connected to our school base and stuff like that. I just feel like it's kind of like brushed over. I don't know if it's because we're like in a different school, but like we don't really know how much access we have until like we sit down with someone from like the mental health like services and like they tell us we have access.
Yeah.
So I just think like that also could be like one of the biggest problems that we have is like having access but not knowing we have access because it's not as promoted. So like when you tell us like, oh, like we have a lot of clinicians here, we have open services, and then we're just like, oh, well, we didn't know that. So then it's like students could be like, oh, I didn't know there was an option to talk to someone that like doesn't, like a therapist costs like a lot of money, whereas
Right.
in like you have like free services in your school. So I just thought it was like interesting that we have those accesses.
Yeah, you can go to school base and sign up yourself. And I believe after a certain age, like you don't need parental consent. I think it's 14. But you could check with Miss Blair on that, and she could definitely guide you to getting the services if you want to ask for them.
And so we were talking about like families and all that stuff. So how did like growing up for you, like how was mental health talked about in your household? How was it viewed?
It really wasn't talked about, and even like thinking back to my years in middle school and high school, it was never discussed. I think it was definitely more stigmatized 25 years ago than it is now. So you really never thought about it if you weren't experiencing it yourself, and if you did, you didn't talk about it.
And did you play any like sports growing up?
Not really. I wasn't
really,
not really an athlete. I was in clubs and managed football and managed wrestling, but not really an athlete myself.
I was gonna like tie that into like kind of like have you like worked with like athletes before, like because we talk about like stigmas and like just day-to-day mental health, but also like athletes face a lot of like stigmas within their own mental health and all that stuff. So like could you kind of just like go into a little bit, like
Yeah,
elaborate?
sure. A couple summers ago, actually, we brought a summer program to the athletics department here where we did groups with the athletes talking about team building, character building, how to work through struggles on and off the field. Because we do notice with a lot of athletes that when their season's over, they don't have any outlet for their, maybe they're angry, maybe they're depressed. They don't have anywhere to go. That's like their family there. So once, we started doing those groups, kids really decided that they liked it and then, self-reported, oh, I want services now. So it gave them that outlet.
So like you said, there's like a lot of stigma around mental health. So do you think there's any reason why that is the case?
I don't, other than the fact that like, historically it just isn't okay to talk about your mental health and it makes you feel embarrassed to admit that you have mental health struggles and may need to take a medication for fear of bullying or being looked down upon by others.
I think stigma comes a lot with like, I don't know, like my father, like, okay, in our family, it's kind of just like not talked as much, like, I guess just growing up, and it's still 25 years later, and it's just still like a huge stigma. And I feel like it really just comes with like decades of like people, like families not talking about mental health. And now I feel like in our generation, like mental health has kind of become more like, oh, this is something important to talk about. So I feel like it's really hard to like break down a stigma that's been built over like so many years, because now it's like, well, what do we do? How do we convince our parents that like mental health is important? How do we convince our grandparents that mental health is important? Because we can kind of understand, because we see like suicide rates, we like pay attention to those, we see like self-harm rates, we see all those things, but like how do we explain those to our parents without them being like, oh well, maybe it's just like a weakness problem? So I guess my question to you would be like, have you ever encountered that within your own family or like with people you know around you?
So it's funny. My dad is the same way. He was like, it's you. You have to be stronger minded. It's not about you need medication or you need therapy or going to talk to people. It's you have to be stronger mentally. And family members of mine have struggled, and then that turned into issues with addiction. So having to really like ingrain in my father, like it's not. Being weak-minded, it really is like a chemical situation that people need support with.
And you said that you grew up in Long Branch, and went to school here. So how would you say that, like, not only the view on mental health, but also like access? How do you say that's changed over the past like couple of years, and what are we still lacking, and what do we still need to work on?
I can definitely say that the school-based department changed over years, where it used to just be a nursing where you would go if you needed medical support or antibiotics or things like that. So now school-based has definitely evolved and includes clinicians that speak different languages, that you can walk in the door and say, I need to speak to somebody. So I think it definitely has evolved and changed for the better. I think that what would also be better is if kids took the access that was provided and utilized it. Instead of sitting in the cafeteria during lunch, maybe on your phone, you could do groups that school-based offers. Maybe you want to do a yoga or a breath work, meditation. So there's different things that doesn't always have to just be therapy. There's other activities that you could do as well.
So you said growing up that, mental health wasn't really talked much in your family. So what happened like growing up that made you realize like, okay, this needs to be talked about? Because I feel like, if your parents or your family is like really drilling the idea like you need to be stronger mentally, like you don't need to talk to nobody and stuff like that, like their kids will also have that same mentality. So what do you think, like, in your life that made you think, like, okay, this needs to be talked about?
Well, like I mentioned, there are family members of mine that struggle with addiction because it usually goes back to untreated mental health. It's a way of self-medicating. I'm going to drink or do drugs to make myself feel better because I'm not accessing healthcare the way that I should. So when those struggles came up, it was a conversation with my father that either we be accepting and we understand that this is something else, or we're going to lose one of our family members. So just as an adult, or, you know, as even your age at this point, you know, you can have real conversations with your families about, listen, we don't have to talk about it, but we just have to understand and try and support our family where we are.
Oh, sorry.
No.
And so, looking more towards your organization, what does the process look like when a child or a family is trying to get help and services?
So the first step would be calling our access team. They talk to you about what support services you're looking for. They help you with your insurance and talk about the financials because it can be difficult to access mental health care without insurance or with certain insurances. So they go through that whole process and get set up with either a clinician or psychiatrist, whichever they're seeking services for. We do also have a low-cost program for those individuals who aren't insured or don't have the insurance that we accept, where they can get therapy services for $15 with one of our graduate level interns. So it just gives another level of access to services.
And with all of your years of like experience and working, what is like one thing that like you've learned? Because I feel like we all just keep learning things, but what's like one thing that really like stood out to you, like that you learned like in your field of work?
I would say that there's always more to learn, and there's always a different avenue to learn. So even though I have an education background, I said with the field I'm in now, I want to go for a graduate certificate. So I'm working for a BCBA, which is a board certified behavior analyst, to look at ways that we can support others. If you're coming out of addiction, how do we change your behaviors? If you are have OCD, how do we change those behaviors? So I felt like that was important now that I'm in the mental health field to really learn on the back end how to support people.
And I was gonna ask, you said what was the youngest age you guys worked with?
3 years old.
3 years old.
Yeah.
So like we were talking about like parents and all that stuff. How is it like with that like process of like trying to find a middle ground with parents of like explaining, hey, I think your child might be developing these like types of behaviors or like something in school is happening, like how do you guys like move forward with that? Because they're young, so parents could just be like, oh well, they're just kids, like, so how would you move forward with that?
So a lot of times with children that young, there's some sort of severe trauma in their background, and they're acting out in ways that their parents don't understand because they can't really communicate at that age. They can't understand why they're feeling what they're feeling. So we have therapists that do play therapy, art therapy, sand play therapy to really get the kids to express what they need to express in a different way. And a lot of times with children that young, parents are already seeing that at home and don't know what to do, so they're seeking support from the school or outside services to help them.
If you ever come across a family who may be like reluctant or even like fully denying care for their children, how do you approach that?
So a lot of times what we do is we offer to give them a tour of our facility. Our space is so much different than many other organizations. We believe in like a family model, so all of our offices look like your living room. We have couches and pictures and lamps, and it's not such a sterile environment that looks like a hospital. And a lot of times when parents come and they see a tour and see, oh, wow, you have this really great art room and this is your education space, it kind of gives them a sense of relief that it doesn't have to be stigmatized and they're willing to give it a try.
And what would be like some advice you would give to students that are like currently like struggling with mental health, but like have a negative perspective on seeking like mental health like help?
I would say lean on your friends, because 2 to 1, they're going to push you to get the support you need. Or I've seen a lot of times friends go to someone out of school or go to someone's parents and say they're struggling and they're not telling you or they're scared to tell you. So in those instances, like that could save someone's life, because you never know at the end of the day what someone is feeling inside and if they're truly expressing what they're experiencing.
Ms. Fleck, thank you again for joining us today.
Of course.
I think we've all learned something very valuable from this. And again, we just thank you so much for the work that you do and what you've talked to us about today.
Of course, and thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Social with a Side of Justice.
And we hope that today's conversation helped you think differently, learn something new, or feel more connected to the issue of mental health and access to care.
Join us next time as we continue the conversation.
Because justice starts with understanding and change starts with a conversation.
And if you or someone you know is struggling, you're not alone.
You can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline anytime. It's free, confidential, and available 24/7.